Would Alexander Isak make Liverpool unstoppable next season? And with several new signings already, what even is their best team? Well, here to break that down is Dr. Mark Carey and Liam Tharme. Not a doctor. Well, as a starting point, Liverpool have already spent £260 million this summer, but their outgoings mean that their finances are actually in a pretty good place. So if something like an Alexander Isak deal were to happen, it could, in theory, be afforded. Before we take a look at what an arrival like that could look like for Liverpool, it is worth taking stock of where they're at currently. Mark, I'll come to you first with a particular absence. That's Luis Diaz, who has been sold to Bayern Munich. What do you think about that move? Do you think there's any chance it could prove to be a bad decision?
I don't think so. I think it is one of those rare moves that suits all parties. I think it suits Luis Diaz because he was looking for a better contract with more money, and he's got that at Bayern Munich. It suits Bayern Munich because they've got their man. They needed a left-sided attacker because Leroy Sané has left and Jamal Musiala is injured for the foreseeable, so they need more attacking firepower. And it suits Liverpool because they've made a profit on a player who's arguably reached their peak. He's a strong attacker for Liverpool, but they do have enough attacking firepower elsewhere. And now they potentially have a pathway for younger players as well. Rio Ngamoa in pre-season has shone on the left side of attack. Cody Gakpo will, of course, be the main left-sided attacker. So I think that it is one of those rare occasions where he leaves with the fans' best wishes as much as anything.
I mean, as Mark says, Liam, it's a good deal, it's a good fee. Do you think there's any chance Liverpool could miss his flexibility though? Because he was pretty flexible.
Yeah, that was one of his big strengths last season. We've got a great viz here that kind of shows his positional breakdown. There were times where Slot used him as the number 9 in kind of more loosely than a pure number 9. Rotated a lot with Dominic Szoboszlai, especially when he played number 10. I think back to the away win at Tottenham Hotspur. That was a great example. He had a great header that he scored from that day off of a cross. So can play off the left, can play as number 9, but you'd kind of say the same about Cody Gakpo as well, and Darwin Núñez to an extent. I know that Núñez has kind of had some contrasting fortunes, but they've definitely got the options there. And overall, I think generally sold quite well this window. Had a quick look at the numbers, and it's the most they've sold players for in any transfer window since 2017-18, back when they sold Coutinho for huge amounts of money. So you've kind of got to finance that big squad churn that they're having this season. And they've obviously lost some players across the board, sold Jarrell Quansah for good money. Obviously, Trent went for a lot less money than they'd want to get for a player of that quality. But if you do want to bring players in, you're going to need to make sales. And we're seeing, I think, quite a lot rolled into one because last season or last summer, they really didn't have many changes at all.
It's worth noting as well, he did have a strong attacking season last season. I think it was 17 goals and 5 assists in all competitions, which is not to be sniffed at. The thing that I'd also say is that because of the attacking firepower that Liverpool have brought in, it's not that they will score 17 goals fewer next season. It's just that I think it will be more evenly distributed across the forward line and across the whole team.
I mean, on that note, it's worth remembering, if anyone has forgotten, that they did win the Premier League last season. This is the champions that we're talking about. So additions that they're making now are to a team that was already winning. With that in mind, though, Liam, you did call Liverpool last season 7 out of 10 specialists. What did you mean by that?
7 out of 10 is probably a bit harsh, probably 8 out of 10. But it's their consistency and their ability in kind of different phases of different games against different opponents that there were no outstanding weaknesses. You can look at other teams that have been either title winning or title chasing in recent years. City known kind of for their passing game, their possession, their dominance of territory. Arsenal for their set pieces, their pressing, their defensive kind of compactness and solidity there.
And the red cards.
And let's not get into that now. But Liverpool were just so solid across the board that they could play in those different matches that they weren't as high pressing as they were under Klopp previously. They didn't kind of suffer as much in transition because of that. Their kind of possession percentage went down, their territory went down a bit compared to Klopp. They weren't quite as aggressive, quite as advanced all the time. Part of this, I think, owed also to them scoring earlier in games quite a lot. It was very similar to their most recent title-winning season before this one under Klopp, where they kind of had games wrapped up by half-time a lot, were 2-0 up, could kind of park the game and manage it however they wanted to. And they've got that, that versatility in attack where they don't have kind of that, or didn't last season anyway, have that fixed number 9 who had to play a certain way. They could play on the counter-attack. Salah especially was phenomenal, kind of those fast breaks, had a ridiculous season for fast break goals alone, let alone the 29 goals that he did score. score. So yeah, they're really versatile, and I think that's something that Slot clearly wants. He's not kind of this idealistic manager of I've got this set philosophy. He's prepared to be adaptable and seems to quite like that.
I think one weakness, if you can call it a weakness, is they do need to improve upon their set pieces, or more attacking set pieces, because they were so strong on that in previous seasons, especially under Jurgen Klopp. I think that can only improve next season, not least because they'll just be targeting that as an improvement. So when you speak about them scoring early, I think in games, if teams come up against them and try and play in a low block to frustrate them, set pieces can be the way to unlock a side if you're just pinning them back and then getting a corner, getting a free kick, and then hopefully then going ahead and then protecting the game state from there.
Mark, they've obviously spent quite big already. Do you think any of the new players that they've brought in hint to any meaningful changes to the team next season?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the talk has been about the attack and the forward line specifically, but I think it is worth talking about the attacking unit more broadly, and I think that includes the two fullbacks that they've brought in, Milos Kerkez and Jeremie Frimpong, and just how attacking they are in their style going forward. They kind of only know one way, and that is to go forward, which I think is worth discussing, of how much that is, the balance between attacking and defensive work. So I've got a visualization here that's using data from Skill Corner, and it essentially looks at off-ball runs by the player when their team is in possession. And I won't go through every single metric here, but if you look at Milos Kerkez on the left, he makes a lot of overlapping and underlapping runs. He tries to get to the byline, supports his winger, and makes sure that he can drag opposition players away to make space for his winger or receive the ball himself. This is something that Arne Slot really likes. I wrote a piece on it at the start of last season to say that he really works on fullbacks making those underlapping and overlapping runs. This is great news that Milos Kerkez is able to do that. Jeremie Frimpong similarly only knows one way, and it is to get in the box, which is the cross receiver runs, or making runs in behind to, again, stretch the opposition. This can be really useful for Mohamed Salah, especially if you're trying to maybe take a bit of the physical intensity away from him and not having so much pressure on him to do something from the right-hand side. Jeremie Frimpong could be a bit of a foil off the ball, but also maybe receive the pass to make these crosses as well. This is great, but it's very, very attacking, and you do have to think about the balance, going the other way if ever Liverpool lose the ball. It'd be interesting to see whether or not the two play frequently at the same time as well, and I think that's something we can come on to in terms of squad balance. But I just want to use an example of a pre-season game for Liverpool. This is against AC Milan. Of course, you don't place too much stock in pre-season friendlies, but I'm going to anyway, because I do think it's quite interesting. So Liverpool are going from right to left here. So Milos Kerkez, highlighted here, is very, very high, near the penalty area, and Liverpool have pretty much just turned the ball over. So AC Milan is starting to counter-attack, and this is an issue which Liverpool, in seasons gone by, less so under Arne Slot, were struggling with, being hit on the counter-attack. And there's just some signs that they might start to struggle with counter-attacking again if they play like this with their fullbacks so high. So as AC Milan are starting this counter-attack, Kerkez is nowhere near Alexis Salamakers, who's highlighted at the bottom here, such that when they eventually get the pass away, Kerkez, again, miles away, Salamakers is able to essentially just boot the ball upfield and then just chase it as though it's some sort of Sunday League game, and just uncontested drive into the penalty area, cross it for No Okafor to finish first time. Again, pre-season friendly, not much stock placed in it, but Kerkez is kind of left trailing behind with no pressure on the ball. Is this a bit of a trend? Kind of, because Kerkez is kind of known to do this. He pushes very, very high, and it puts a lot of pressure on the left centre-back or the left central midfielder to be the one to protect him and make sure that they try and snuff out those counter-attacks early doors. So this is actually an example against Liverpool. And again, Liverpool turn over the ball. Liverpool going from left to right here. Kerkez very, very high up the field, such that when Liverpool turn over the ball, Kerkez is now out of shot. He's so high up the field. Salah is cheating a little bit here. He doesn't track his man so that he stays high, such that when he receives the ball, he's in a good position. Szoboszlai plays the ball to Salah, and it requires Dean Howson to essentially fly out of his position and make a challenge. Now, he does make a successful challenge here, and the attack is snuffed out. But if Salah just nicks the ball away, he's essentially got a one-on-one with the goalkeeper. So
it's pretty risky.
It's risky play, and it just requires, as I say, either a midfielder or a centre-back to be in a position to try and snuff out those counter-attacks. And that is something which I think that Liverpool will have to have a bit of push and pull on either side. If one goes, the other one tucks in. And just, as I say, with the attacking firepower they now have, the attacking unit, including the fullbacks, it is just worth thinking about, with my John McKenzie hat on, about what they do out of possession.
What about the full 11 then? What do you think the first 11 for Liverpool looks like with all these new signings?
Well, I think that in itself is an interesting question because I almost don't think a first 11 or a best 11 exists for Liverpool, but I think that is a massive positive, and I know that Liam's going to come on to that, and that it is maybe a bit of a horses for courses situation. Liverpool have the personnel and the style to be able to hopefully break down different opponents and the different tactical styles.
What say you, Liam Tharme?
What say I? Well, we've come up with some hypothetical scenarios, Joe, to kind of show how this might manifest. We've come up with 3. I'm going to run through them one by one. Kind of 3 different game situations or opponents that they're going to face and how that game kind of manifests. Because one thing we hear from head coaches a lot nowadays, especially in press conferences, how certain players have certain specific traits and strengths and also weaknesses that mean they're better or more suited to certain games. Pep Guardiola has spoken about it with kind of his Manchester City centre-back, saying, you know, they've got 4 or 5 world-class centre-backs because they all have different strengths. There's games where you'd need a John Stones where you wouldn't need a Ruben Diaz and vice versa. And we see that kind of with Liverpool now. The first scenario that we're going to go through is kind of them breaking down a low block. So I kind of think of this as the 3 p.m. game at home on a Saturday, mid-table team going to Anfield, and they're going to sit here, and we've got the opposition here with the turquoise counters. In a kind of classic 4-4-2 mid-block that are going to be stubborn, say, go on then, break us down, we'll kind of sit in and plan the counter-attack. And in this kind of game, you probably want what Mark was saying in terms of the running, the athleticism, the end product that you get from a Jeremie Frimpong and a Milos Kerkez, who can really push on. You can then let someone like Cody Gakpo and Mo Salah really kind of play inside. They can really get those fullbacks pushed on, overload the last line. You probably split the centre-backs a little bit wider, and that makes space again for the strength of someone like Ryan Gravenberch, who's such a talented passer that he can be the one that can break lines. It's also the reason why you probably want Florian Wirtz in a game like this, because Wirtz can be between those lines. He's so good at receiving under pressure that he makes someone like Gravenberch effective in these games, because as good as the pass is that's going to break the line, you need a player that can receive it under pressure when players are going to jump on top of him, and he can take that and then he can link play through to Gakpo. Hypothetically, you can then get Kerkez wide, and all of a sudden Ekitike, Salah, Frimpong, Wirtz, and everyone else can start attacking the box, and you can break teams down that way.
Okay, so that's your low block 3 p.m. Saturday against Burnley. Who's next?
Sure, so this is perhaps a game where they might end up playing more in transition. I think of this as perhaps I feel like Newcastle actually feel like a classic example. Teams that are going to press them, or teams that will also be aggressive on the ball, that are going to leave those spaces that, it might become a bit of a basketball game. There might be a lot of turnover. In a game like that of so much transition, I think someone like Jeremie Frimpong might be valuable because he's got such athleticism, but can perhaps be quite attacking focused. He's come as a wing back, or arrives as a wing back from Leverkusen. So you perhaps want Conor Bradley, who can do a bit more of that, those recovery runs, those big sprints back, those big tackles. Also someone like Curtis Jones might make a little bit more sense in midfield because he's a bit more versatile, a bit bigger as well, a bit more physical, someone that can kind of get a bit more stuck into duels that might not get as targeted. And I think it's the kind of game that then gets made for someone like Darwin Núñez, where if you think about an opposition team being high up the pitch, perhaps they've committed their fullback and he can then start up here, start on the blind side, can kind of cheat. Those passes in behind might suddenly open up for someone like him to run in those straight lines and chase. And look, we saw it with Hugo Ekitike last season, where one of the best strikers in Europe, sure he's playing in the Bundesliga, which kind of gets, I think, slightly unfairly stereotyped as such a counter-attacking league, but was in a system and a setup where that was really prioritised and could, show those strengths where he could mix really well as being the player that would score, the player that could, carry the ball long distances and provide. And it's a real huge strength for Mo Salah as well. We saw last season, I think it was 22 of his goals came in the second half. So he's such a good player when opposition teams are forced to come onto Liverpool when they're behind. He's still got really good speed, really good dribbling. I think the fact that Liverpool are so good at breaking in numbers that they can commit bodies forward means that often, he can stay high, he can chase the ball, players will provide him with opportunity, and he's so clinical in those situations.
I think that's potentially assuming that Núñez will stay ahead of the new season, which he may not do, but I think Gakpo is still so powerful off the left, and he could still play as a transitional player. I think it's interesting sometimes that people maybe think that Florian Wirtz's arrival means that Szoboszlai will come out of the team, but I do think the two can play together. Szoboszlai could maybe play as more of a number 8. You could maybe take McAllister out because he's such a technical player in a transitional game. You could bring Szoboszlai in. You could still keep Jones in as well, but he's also potentially a bit more of a technical player as well. And you could have Gravenberch, Szoboszlai and Wirtz, which granted is actually quite an attacking style when you look at it, but they are so physically intense as well that actually when they go very quickly. So it just shows again just how many options they do have, and there's so many rotations and configurations of this team, whether it's in roles or in personnel.
What's the third one, Liam?
So the third scenario, I'd perhaps picture this as like maybe like a Champions League knockout round especially would be the interesting one. Think back to perhaps the PSG second leg last season where they went in leading. But really it's kind of the bigger game where you want more control. You perhaps want your slightly more experienced players, players that I think have a good tendency to stay on the ball. They're going to help you control those moments and not make too many mistakes or turn the ball over too much that you might lose the ball in transition. So it's kind of why I've switched out, a bit more hypothetically, Joe Gomez in at fullback in the kind of situation where really it might look like that classic 4-3-3 on paper, but it's going to sort of actually move into a back three, and that would allow Andy Robertson to push on a little bit more. You can then bring Cody Gakpo a little bit more inside. Gives you that extra bit of cover against transitions where we were talking before about if the fullbacks against the low block are going to commit really high. Here you're not going to give up kind of as much space or be as underloaded in those situations where opposition teams might break against you. And we were speaking earlier about Luis Diaz and Szoboszlai and those kind of dual number 10 roles last season. I think this is the kind of game where Florian Wirtz would work really well in that with Szoboszlai. Again, two players that are really good at those technical moments where they need to receive between the lines. They can also lead a press really well, which I think is really important in matches like this where you can force opposition teams back. You can force them to kick long, which means that you should hopefully get more possession. You can then break teams down a little bit more. And ultimately it would allow Robertson and Salah to really push on. You can then pin teams back a bit deeper, really push their defensive line back. Keep the fullbacks deep as well, which is really important because then it means you start getting these situations where it becomes a real problem for the wide opposition players where they say, oh, do we jump or do we sit in deep to defend Gakpo? Because if you then start going to Van Dijk, say they jump onto press and they start locking on, all of a sudden you get these situations where Robertson on the far side and Gakpo can really be in that space. So again, it would be another sign of Liverpool's real flexibility. And Mark and I could probably have more arguments again about players that you'd switch in and out of this. But I think this is the overall kind of idea.
Yeah, again with personnel, but also maybe again just dropping Szoboszlai ever so slightly deeper. Wirtz could play potentially as a bit of a false nine, and then you could kind of drag Gakpo and Salah is a bit more of a narrow position. When Wirtz kind of goes, one of the centre-backs comes with them, then the other player can kind of go then as well. Or Wirtz himself can obviously play and link up either side. He obviously drifts a little bit more to the left-hand side, but can drift more to the right as well. As you say, he can drop in and link. So he himself is able to play different positions. What I like to call Florian versatility. You can have that one for free. But that's another one that you just think that you've got the different options for both the rotations of the positions, but as I say, the personnel within and between games.
I think you'll find it's versatility.
Versatility.
Okay, well, I think it's time to move on to Alexander Isak. Before we do that, it's worth saying that he is a potential Liverpool signing. We should remember that he is under contract at Newcastle United until 2028, so the ball obviously remains in Newcastle's court, whether or not he's touring and training with them. That being said, it is clearly affecting Eddie Howe's preparations. Just take a listen to this.
Eddie Howe over the weekend, I think that he's handled the situation as well as he possibly can for someone who's not in control of it, but equally, Howe is usually very careful with his words. He very rarely misspeaks. He spoke on Saturday of Newcastle as a club having a big decision to make. Now, that's a weird thing to say in the sense that as things stand, they haven't received a bid. So what is the decision to make? The reality of the situation is, for now, everyone is just almost waiting and saying, is someone going to make that bid for Alexander Isak? And then if they do, depending on what level it is, how will Newcastle respond to that?
So that was Chris Woff from the Athletic FC podcast, highlighting some of the emotional impact that this story is having. Mark, we know from our colleague David Ornstein's reporting earlier in the summer that Liverpool were willing to go up to £120 million for Isak, which would be a British transfer record. I think obviously most Premier League fans understand that he's a good player. But what is it that you think makes him potentially the most expensive British, transfer of all time? Yeah,
I mean, there's a whole host of reasons why financially it could be that sort of fee that's not necessarily attributed to his quality per se, the market, everything that's going on around him.
The contract as well, right?
The contract, exactly. But in simple terms, he is very good at a lot of stuff. Now, obviously, goal scoring being one of them. I think he's a 3 goals in 4 games sort of player in the past couple of seasons, which of course is hugely valuable. But it's kind of everything that he offers to the wider attacking unit that I think is really interesting. Now, I've got an image of his share of touches across last season. Now, it feels a little bit counterintuitive to do this for a striker because we're more interested in sort of his goals. But I do think this is super interesting because it shows, of course, a higher proportion of his touches between the width of the 6-yard box. That's crucial. But just how many are on either side, and it is true of what we kind of know about Alexander Isak, of how much he likes to drop deep as well, but sort of drift into those pockets of space either side. And I kind of want to show all of the attributes that he has with examples specifically against Liverpool, specifically against Virgil van Dijk, for a piece that I did last season, which is as good a barometer as any to show his quality when you're able to at times bully Virgil van Dijk. So let's walk through a couple. So just flying through them really, but he's able to drift into wide areas and just kind of drive down the touchline, and Virgil van Dijk doesn't like to come out of his position. So knowing Alexander Isak's quality, he's pulled across and he actually loses this duel, and Isak drives to the byline. But pulling into wide areas and driving forward, playing with your back to goal and sort of trying to lead the line again. Virgil van Dijk trying to stay touch tight to him because he knows the quality that he can have if he turns and shoots. So playing with more of back to goal play, dropping into those deep areas and trying to link play with runners going beyond him. He's really good at kind of, dropping into those central areas, and often it's the Newcastle's wingers who will make those sorts of runs in behind. So he's very capable at that. Dribbling as well, it's been widely spoken about, a little bit more at Real Sociedad, I'd probably say, but he's still able to get the ball, and considering his frame and his height, he's still a really proficient dribbler in a 1v1. And Van Dijk's actually drifted over from left centre-back to make sure, again, he's got a close watch on Isak. All of these examples are from the past 3 seasons of Newcastle and Liverpool games, so it's not just isolated to one game or last season.
His dribbling as well always makes me feel as though he can, more than some other strikers, create goals out of nowhere.
That Everton one, right?
Yeah, well,
the
Everton
not his goal
assist.
in the end, but yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And I think it's one of those where, because of his height, because of his frame, you think actually he's not capable of doing this with such sort of quick feet, but he wriggles out and he drives away with such a wiry frame, as I say. So he's kind of a bit of a surprise package, even though you still know what he's going to do. But I want to talk about the kind of the bread and butter stuff as well, of him being that sort of number 9, and really good, which I've noted a few times, of playing between the centre backs. And it's an obvious thing, I suppose, for a central striker, but he's really good at staying on the blind side of one centre back and driving away from the other one. So this is an example here, which he actually scores from this move away to Liverpool. This is another one. Again, this is the one that Virgil van Dijk ended up wiping him out and getting a red card, getting sent off. But again, that through ball, that penetrating pass in behind the centre backs, to be able to receive it on the inside of his foot and then kind of drive all in one movement. He's really good at doing that, rather than having the touch and then figuring out what am I going to do next. He's
Which
really
is
good at taking
so hard to do, right?
Really, at speed, taking it in his stride. Very, very good at that. This is from a couple of seasons ago now. This was from last season, again, on the blind side of Virgil van Dijk, being able to drive in for a through ball. And I do want to talk about the main one in this same game, which was actually in the first half, of him scoring the goal, which was an emphatic goal. He's able to score penalty box finishes, but from outside the box as well. But look at where Virgil van Dijk's looking, and again, on the blind side, between the 2 centre-backs, able to actually receive the pass, and as he receives the pass, Van Dijk's not even looking at the ball because he sort of discombobulated Virgil van Dijk, one of the best players in the Premier League, with his movement, such that when he takes the ball with the inside of his foot, as we've spoken about before, and then rifles it with his right foot, I think it was 110 kilometres an hour, I think.
The speed he gets shots off with, like, a lot of minimal backlift as well, is quite incredible. There were similar ones against Arsenal where, it's sometimes it's not even a touch out of his feet. It's controlling those snapshots. They're fantastic.
Early shots, little backlift, at speed. So all of those against Liverpool. The goal being kind of the obvious one of his main attributes, but hopefully giving a bit of flavour that he is kind of able to do a little bit of everything and a little bit of everything well, which shows why he's so well-rounded. And I suppose those sorts of strikers in short supply, therefore his value is as high as it is.
Well, Liam, you said something quite interesting about this, hypothetical potential move off camera. You said that even if Isak did go to Liverpool for a record-breaking sum, he wouldn't have to be their Gyökeres. What did you mean by that?
Well, he doesn't need to be their goal scorer, right? They've got the current Golden Boot winner from last season. They've got Mo Salah, who consistently scores so many goals. And what Arsenal then need comparatively is a player that can take on a lot of that burden, that they historically have had a really good spread of goals. They, of course, I think Saga was that Salah role a bit to a degree, but had injury issues. So he won't need to take on, and that's not to say he can't or won't score that many goals, and maybe he and Salah could share them a little bit more. But Liverpool have worked just fine with having a really good goal scoring wide forward, a bit akin to Tottenham with Son Heung-min for so many seasons as well. So I think really what he'd offer is more that all-round game, the ability to pin defenders and keep them back, push that defensive line back, be an option to break lines more centrally, to receive and then set into number 10 or midfielders, and to play wider to the wingers as well. And I think really his off-ball stuff and probably his out-of-possession work is going to be really, really important. So one of the big things we saw with Liverpool last season with Salah was them kind of minimising his defensive responsibility, especially in the pressing. Whether that was partly tactical, I think partly physical, so that he doesn't have to run as much and fatigues less, that he can then do just more of his work basically in attack. There's a grab from the West Ham game that we mentioned earlier, which is where the slot quote came from. Here's Luis Diaz arcing his run in the press to force Fabianski to chip the ball out to the left back. But Salah often stayed really high and would stay basically in line with the opposition centre back, so he wouldn't be deeper to press the full back and be running. He'd kind of stand there and teams often would play over him. And the result was that when Liverpool locked on, Trent Alexander-Arnold would have to make a big sprint from fullback, then to do all the running for Salah and go out and press the fullback, which in this game was fairly effective because West Ham had a right footer at left back and kind of got boxed in a bit, and I think just weren't as good or well rehearsed a build-up team with their patterns. But it's definitely a breaking point possibly in the press if teams are better and smarter to that you might then need Alexander Isak to do more running, and perhaps that's then a role for Jeremie Frimpong as well if you are pressing the same way to make that jump. But it's definitely something to consider, I think, as Mark speaks about the more all-round package that he can bring.
Okay, let's say he did join Liverpool. How much does it move the needle? Like, does it? I know everyone, particularly analysts, would be reticent to say before a season began that there was maybe an out favourite. But when I look at what potential Liverpool team, including Isak, would be, it's so hard not to say they're surely going to win the Premier League, Mark.
I'm also reticent to make too much of a prediction at this early stage, but I do think someone like Alexander Isak joining the Premier League champions is only going to strengthen them. You do well to bet against Liverpool being in the top two at the very least. I do think that there's still considerations about the out of possession side of things, and we're talking about just front load, and they do need to add to their attacking line with everything that's happened this summer. However, I do think they still need to think about that balance of how they sort of fit the configurations of all of those players. It's also worth noting that if they do want to fight on four fronts, which they will, I think if they played every game, it'd be a 63-game season. They'll have all of those rotations in personnel anyway, so we're not expecting Alexander Isak to play every game anyway. It will be a Hugo Ekitike for some of those games. I'm sort of trying to dodge the question because I do think it's always difficult to predict too much, but there's little doubt that he would make them absolutely stronger than they already are, and they are champions.
Treble winners, Liam, is it?
Well, they could do a quadruple, couldn't they? Theoretically. I think there's favourites regardless if they sign Isak or not, based on how convincing they were last season and so well-rounded. I think you can pinpoint perhaps bigger strengths but also bigger weaknesses in other sort of title chasing teams, and we saw obviously a big drop off of Manchester United, of Tottenham as well, that is perhaps not quite as competitive at the very top as it once was. But we could have had this same discussion a few seasons ago after 2019-20 when Liverpool won the league and then I think had a 30-point drop off the following year. So there's problems that can arise in a season through injuries or just tactical problems that we kind of can't foresee now but have to expect will come up. So it's very easy to look at last season and all the success and think that can be perfectly replicated again, but we'd be a bit naive to pretend that can happen exactly the same way.
I mean, there are other areas of the pitch as well, Mark, aren't there?
Yeah, they're short at centre-back. I think that's fair to say. Obviously, Jarell Kwanzaa has left as well. Their main senior centre-backs are Virgil van Dijk and Ibrahima Konate, and beyond that, there's not too much depth. So I think they certainly do need to bring someone in. Ryan Gravenberch can play there and drop in, but ideally you wouldn't have to do that because then you do something from midfield. Wataru Endo could play there as well, but again, he doesn't really possess the height or the strength to play there consistently.
He did play there in a pre-season game though, didn't he? It
was him and Kostas Tsimikas as the main centre-backs finishing the game, which is not ideal and just goes to show that they don't have as much strength and depth in that area, especially when you compare it with the forward line where we're talking about all these different options. Ideally, they would need to keep the two centre-backs fit. And it's interesting that you say after the title-winning season in what would the season being in 2020-21 was when things started to fall apart because of losing Virgil van Dijk, and then the dominoes fell after that and you had Fabinho and Jordan Henderson playing centre-back as well. So you don't want a situation like that. So it looks likely that they'll be, well, they certainly are in the market for a centre-back, but it looks likely that they'll get someone through the door.
Great.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football